The majority of the reviews we do here at Kit Guru are for hardware that's either aimed at gamers or at gaming systems. However, there are some exceptions to that rule, and one of those exceptions is here for review today. This is the APNX Creator C1, and yes, you've guessed it, this is a case aimed at content creators. But that doesn't mean you can't use it for a gaming system, as the company suggests its high airflow design and support for high-end hardware will appeal to more than just content creators. But what we are here to find out is if it's any good and if it's worth the $160 price tag.
Utilizing a 90-degree rotated motherboard layout, Alt F2 carries the torch of Silverstone's stack effect, bottom to top directional airflow design legacy.
So this is the new APNX Creator C1. It's available now, and it's available in 3 different colours. You can get it in white, black, or this ChromaFlair colour, which is technically blue, but it kind of reminds me of an old Peugeot 205 GTI that I used to drive in the late 90s. That was called Miami Blue, and we used to call that a pearlescent colour. So what that means is, depending on which angle it catches the light, it actually creates a different shade of the colour, or a different colour altogether. So it's kind of a blue, but then in certain angles it looks almost purple. The MSRP price ranges from $139 to $159, depending on which colour case you choose, whether it's black, white, or this ChromaFlair colour. This is obviously the most expensive. If you are a UK buyer, you can pick this up from OC UK. The white version is priced at £149.99. Black is £139.98. This one has a bit more of a premium price to pay, as I said. This is £167.99 at OC UK currently. The main features of this case, one is quite clear to see, this what they call Scandi or Scandinavian appearance. It also features a wide range of interior cooling options, including support for dual 360mm radiators. It has toolless outer panels and quick release brackets, a unique 90-degree front stroke side mesh panel. So unlike normal cases where your front panel would detach and be a separate panel, this actually continues around a curve around to the side, and the mesh continues around there as well. We'll see why that mesh continues around there in a moment. It also comes pre-installed with 4 APNX FP1 fans. So there's 3 140mm fans in the front and a single 120 in the rear. There's a total of 11 fan mounts inside the case. The motherboard tray is technically compatible with the Gigabyte Project Stealth motherboard, so those motherboards that have all the connectors on the back, this case is compatible with those motherboards. Before we take a closer look at the case, just want to show you what's included with it. There's not a lot, just a small accessories box. In here you just have a few screws, a few rubber grommets for mounting hard drives, some zip ties, and a few Velcro straps. There's also a user guide. That is basically all you get with the case. There is an optional GPU vertical mount for the GPU, which comes with a PCI riser cable, but you have to pay extra for that. So let's start having a closer look at the case. We'll start by removing this side panel. It's really easy to remove. It's a quick release. You just push it from the rear and then it just pops out like that. It's got a slight tint to it. It's not too dark, so you can still see into the system really easily. Top panel is also a quick release. You just put your thumbs at the back like that, push it up, and it releases with the same type of quick release fittings, just located on these pins. You might be able to see on the camera the different angles and the different colour. One thing I do have to say about the finish on this case, the paint finish, it isn't particularly smooth. I don't really can hear it, but it is quite rough. It almost feels a bit like wet and dry sandpaper, so that could be improved a little, I think. Up the top here you have a removable fan stroke radiator bracket. It's not a very innovative way of removing it, I'd say. It's actually held in place with 6 screws, not thumb screws, not captive screws, so you have to take a bit of time unscrewing all the 6 screws manually, and then once you've got all the screws out, it just lifts out. It's very flimsy, this. It's made from really thin steel. I believe in the review guide it says the chassis is made from 0.8mm thick steel, but it's not got much webbing in it, and it is really flimsy. I don't know how well that comes across on the camera, but it is very flimsy and very weak looking. I guess when you get the radiator bolted to it, it will strengthen that up, and there is a bit of adjustment either way on that on the mounting points, so you can adjust the radiator a little from front to back. Front I/O connectivity includes a power and reset button, 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, a USB 3.0 Type C port, and a combined 3.5mm audio jack. Flip it round again and we've got easily removable side panel. So this is actually in two sections, this right hand side panel. One section again is on these quick release fittings. Again, it's got a big vent down here, and that's because you've got another panel here internally that you can install hard drives, SSDs. You can also install a fan up here blowing onto the back of the motherboard to give some cooling to the back of the motherboard and back of the CPU socket. Front panel has got this curved design that continues the mesh all the way from the front to the side. It looks all right. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like a standalone air conditioning unit. So if you like the look of air conditioning units, you'll probably like the look of this. It's okay. It's not really to my taste. Again, this comes off really easily though. You just slide it upwards and then it pulls out, and there you can see it's just mesh. There's no actual dust filter on there, but there is a dust filter at the front. And the reason for that curved panel and that mesh that continues round is you can potentially install some fans and radiator here. Take a closer look at that in a minute. So back to the front of the case, there is a nylon dust filter on there. So that's one of the better types of dust filters, usually better for airflow. Nylon dust filters, a couple of clips that hold it in place, and then you can just release it out there. And it's like a nylon dust filter on a plastic frame. Then behind that, you have 3 of the APNX FP1 140mm fans. These are actually 30mm thick frames. Apparently that gives an improvement in performance according to the official review guide. I think they quoted something like 30 to 50% improvement in performance, but didn't actually say what they were comparing that against, so take that with a pinch of salt. And then also in the back of the case there's a 120mm version of the same fan. This front bracket isn't removable, so you don't have the option to take the front bracket out to put the radiator and fans in on the bench. It's fixed in position. The fans screw into that bracket from the front into female threads. So you can't technically install a radiator behind that, which is a bit of a shame. So it means that officially front mounted radiators are not supported in this case. So looking in from this side, which is the main compartment of the case where you install all your hardware, it's technically designed so that you can run it in 2 different types of modes, shall we say. So there's the clean look mode, which is how it is now with this cable management cover over there, and you can see there's an integrated GPU anti-sag support there, or you can remove the cable management panel and part of the power supply shroud at the front, and that puts it into its performance mode, which means you can then install fans and radiators at the top and fans or a radiator on this side mount. Having this cable management panel in there means you can't technically install any fans or radiators down the side, and removing that cable management panel means you also lose the graphics card anti-sag support bracket. In terms of overall cooling support, so as I said, the case comes with 4 fans pre-installed, so 3 140 at the front, a 120 at the rear. In total, you can fit a maximum of 11 fans, so 3 on the front, 3 at the top, 3 down the side, 1 in the rear, and then 1 on that weird mount that blows on the back of the motherboard tray. The front panel supports either 3 120 or 3 140mm fans. It doesn't technically support radiator installations. With the cable management panel removed, in the side you can fit up to 3 120 fans or up to a 360mm radiator. In the top you can fit 3 120 fans or 2 140 fans or up to a 360mm radiator. In the rear it's just a single 120 fan or single 120 radiator. You've also got that other fan mount behind the motherboard tray. According to the official specs, you can fit 2 360mm radiators simultaneously, so that'd be 1 in the top and 1 down this side panel. Maximum CPU cooler height is 166mm tall. Motherboard support is up to ATX formats, but it doesn't mean you can install ATX, micro ATX and mini ITX motherboards. Maximum graphics card length is up to 395mm, so that sounds like even ample space for some of the biggest RTX 4090 cards. You can see there's plenty of cable management cutouts, and on the top of the power supply shroud it's completely vented. However, I think APNX have missed a bit of a trick there, because You've got this vented power supply shroud. The floor of the case is also heavily vented, but there's no mounts for fans on there, and we've seen in recent testing of some new cases that we have reviewed recently that adding a couple of fans up there does improve the temperature of the GPU. So I think that is slightly something that's been overseen there. I think that could have been a good option to have that in this case, and it's not there. Also, plenty of cable management cutouts on top of the power supply shroud. There's a couple. You've got this huge gap down the side of the motherboard there for the 24 pin and USB Type-C and everything else that comes off that side of the motherboard. You've also got these up here and along the bottom, and these cutouts here, I'm guessing they are to allow the case to support that Gigabyte Project Stealth motherboard. I don't have one of those motherboards to test that, but I'm guessing these are what those cutouts are for, and the rear facing connectors will slot into those pretty neatly. The back of the case, it's a pretty standard layout. At the top here, you've got the 120mm fan mount, rear I/O cutout for the motherboard, 7 PCIe slots, and then right at the bottom is the power supply mount. It is one of those removable mounts, so you screw your power supply to that, slot it in from the back, and then just tighten up the thumb screws. It's a bit more interesting when you get round to this side of the case because there's a couple of modular panels to remove. However, like the top panel, they're not fitted to the case, or you don't remove them in any innovative way. Holding the cable management panel on, there's 5 screws, then there's another 4 screws to hold this drive mount panel and fan mount panel on. And then also, if you want to turn the case into the performance mode, you've also got to remove 4 screws from this power supply shroud here to allow for the space for the radiator to fit in. So in total, if you want to remove all the modular panels, you have to take out 19 screws. None of them are captive and none of them are thumb screws. So it is quite a time consuming job, and it's quite fiddly, and it's not a great system to use. In this day and age, we're always looking for more innovative and new ideas and things to make life more simple. This doesn't do that at all. So it's not something I'm keen on. That I would have liked to have seen some better ideas for quick release panels, such as this top mount for the radiators. That could have simply just clipped into some slots and just held in place by a single thumb screw. There must be an easier way to remove this cable management panel. 5 screws that you have to undo manually. That is just a pain. And then you've got 4 screws holding this on as well. I think this panel here could quite easily have been a quick release panel on these kind of same push pin designs or something like that. Doesn't feel like a modern design to me. So once you've got all those 19 screws out, you can see a bit more clearly what's going on here. So here is the mount for either 320mm fans or up to a 360mm radiator. This is the part of the power supply shroud that was removed so that you can actually fit a radiator in there. This is the cable management panel with the integrated GPU mount, and you can actually adjust that mount. Those thumb screws are a bit tight from the factory. You can see it slides up and down, will hold the GPU and support it at the rear end. And then here is the panel that is used for mounting drives. So on here you can either install 3 2.5-inch SSDs on here or 3 3.5-inch hard drives. Also, there is that mount for 120mm fan. Behind that, you can see you've got a lot of space actually for cable management. So the depth from the outer panel to the motherboard tray is around about 40mm, which is a very healthy amount of cable management space. Also in here, you can see there is a fan hub. So this is a 5-port PWM and ARGB fan hub. 4 of those ports are already taken by the pre-installed fans, but you could install some other fans and some other RGB products to that if you want to keep everything in sync. Down at the bottom here is space for the power supply. It's a pretty decent amount of space. It accepts standard ATX power supplies up to 270mm long in total. Then on the floor of the case, you've got some quite chunky plastic feet on the floor, and these are rubber anti-vibration pads on there. I'd say they're probably between 20 to 30mm, probably about 25mm in depth in total. Then the whole of the case floor is covered by this filter, and it's one of the nylon filters again, so it's one of the better types, and it just slides out from the back. As I say, it's a nylon filter in a plastic frame that slides in and out quite easily. And then the whole of the case floor, that is perforated, so kind of a mesh design. As I say, it would have been good to have some fan mounts on top of that power supply shroud because of this open floor of the case. Would have been some decent airflow, I think, there to the graphics card, but doesn't actually support that feature. So that's all the main specs and features of the APNX Creator C1 covered, and some of my initial thoughts on the case. As always, if there's anything I've missed, if you want to ask any questions about the case, drop me a line in the video's comment section, and don't forget, as always, there will be a written review over on kitguru.net that covers everything as well, so make sure you head over there and check that out. But now it's on to the build phase of the review. Quick look at the hardware that we'll be using for this. So the motherboard is the X570 Aorus Master. CPU is an AMD Ryzen 9 7900X. Memory for this system is a 64GB G-Skill Trident Z5 RGB. So this is DDR5, it's two 32GB modules, and it's 64 mega transfers per second. Storage, it's just a single 2TB M.2 drive. It's the Seagate FireCuda 530. So as I say, 2TB, PCIe Gen 4, M.2 NVMe SSD. For graphics, it's a Gigabyte RX 7900 XT gaming OC, not the XTX, just the XT. Cooling, the CPU is the EK Nucleus AIO CR360 DRGB, so very good CPU coolness. I'm using this for simplicity really, because there's no additional controllers or fan hubs required to run this. Everything can connect up to the motherboard headers, and we might even connect up the RGB lighting to the spare port on the hub inside the Creator C1 case. Case fans will be all the stock case fans, so the 4 that come with the case. I want to test the case in its original condition, and I'll be building the system with the configuration in the clean look, or whatever they called it. And then powering the system is a Seasonic Focus GX1000. So this is 1000 watt, 80 plus gold rated, and it's PCIe 5 ATX3 ready. So that's all the hardware for the system. I'll get on with the build. You can watch the time lapse, and then we'll come back and do some thermal testing and see how the case performs. Creator C1 build is finished. System's up and running, so we've been able to run some thermal tests. The build looks okay, but there were some problems with the build and with the case that I will go through towards the end when I look at the pros and cons of the case. The RGB lighting effects are okay. The fans look decent. The RGB effects in the fans are well diffused and there isn't much light bleed from around the hubs of the fan, so that's a good thing. And you can control RGB lighting effects with the button on the front. The reset button is repurposed to control RGB lighting effects, so you can just scroll through various different solid colours and you can get to some patterns as well. So there's like preset patterns in the controller, and you can choose basically any RGB effect you want by using the button. You can also, if you want, synchronize to motherboard RGB. There's a cable that goes from the hub to the motherboard as well, so you can do it either way, whichever you prefer. With all case testing, we run the usual thermal test, which is a combined Cinebench R23 stress test and a 3D Mark Speedway stress test. So simultaneously those two are run for 30 minutes to fully load the system. Thermal performance of the APNX C1 looks solid, with the AMD Ryzen 9 7900X running at under 70 degrees C delta in either configuration, with the side panels installed or removed, which is what we would expect from this CPU running Precision Boost Overdrive. Moving the AIO to the side mount caused a minor decrease in CPU temperature, so with an AMD Ryzen 7000 CPU in this case, AIO placement isn't too critical. It's a similar story with GPU temperature. With the case in the default configuration, average GPU temperature is around 35 degrees C delta, which is normal for this GPU in a high airflow case. As we often see with case testing, removing the tempered glass side panel reduces GPU temperature, but it isn't as severe as in some cases with the C1. So overall, the high airflow design of the Creator C1 seems to work okay. Noise output isn't significantly reduced or increased by changing the case from its default configuration. However, there is a slight drop in noise output when removing the tempered glass side, as more airflow means the GPU temperature is lower, fan speed is reduced, and therefore noise output is lower. So first, the good points of this case. It's obviously available in several different colours, so you can pick it up in white, black, or this ChromaFlair kind of blue stroke purple pearlescent, depending on which angle you hit it with light. Good to have a choice when you're buying a case and you might have some kind of theme that this will fit in with. That's fair enough, except the problem with the ChromaFlair is you have to pay around about a £27 premium in the UK to get it in that colour, which seems a bit excessive to me. It comes with 4 fans pre-installed, and as I said, the RGB lighting effects on the fans look good and they seem to do a good job of airflow as well. It also comes with that 5-port PWM and ARGB hub built into the case. Again, these are things that just add on to the value of the case. You probably noticed that I've got an EATX board in here, and in performance mode, although it's not officially supported, it does fit fine. In this clean look mode with the cable management panel in the way, the cable management slightly interferes with EATX, but you can just leave the top mounting screw out of the panel and it will fit. And it also supports multiple 360mm radiators, one on the side mount and one in the roof. So onto the negatives or the cons. And you're going to have to bear with me on this one because there are quite a few negatives with this case. First, all those screws that are required to be removed to detach the modular panels, there's 19 in total. None of them are thumb screws. They all have to be undone by a screwdriver, and none of them are captive. Seems like a really odd way to do it. In a modern case, you'd expect some better solution to that. Less screws, captive screws, quick release fittings, but that's how it's been done, and to me it seems quite a dated design. The whole interior design of the case, it doesn't seem particularly new or modern in any way. It's all just basic features that we've seen before, like parts of the power supply, the shroud that can be removed to make more space at the front and for the side mount. This cable management panel down the side mount again, it kind of reminds you of maybe like a Corsair 4000D, which is a good case, or it was a good case when it was launched, but that was launched 3 or 4 years ago. Things have moved on since then, so it doesn't feel like a particularly modern design. And the side panels are quite awkward to get into position, especially that front curved one. You've got to line it up at the front and the side, the top and the bottom all at once, and slot it into position. That's quite difficult, and when you do get them all slotted and clipped into place, they don't look perfectly aligned, so it doesn't shout high quality to me. Front radiator mounting isn't officially supported because of the way the fans screw on from the front into this panel into a female thread, it means you can't technically put a radiator behind and send the screws all the way through. You could potentially drill those out, those female threads, and use longer screws and put a radiator behind the fans, but out of the box, front radiator installation isn't supported. This bracket at the top that holds the AIO and the top fans in position, a couple of problems with that. It's really flimsy, it's made out of really thin steel, there's not much webbing in it, so as you saw earlier on in the video, it bends quite easy. When you get the AIO mounted up to it, it stiffens it up and it is a little better, but it's not in the correct position. So when you've got the AIO or some fans installed up there, everything is pushed towards the right hand side or the back of the case, which means it's quite tight to motherboard components. When you've just got single fans in a push configuration, it's okay, there's some space, but you do have to watch out for your EPS cables getting in the way of the fans. I had to really tighten them down and zip tie them in place to make sure that they didn't move. If you were to add push-pull fans, so fans on both sides of the radiator, you wouldn't be able to fit this 360mm radiator in here, and I don't think you would be able to fit a 280 in either. If you're running the case in performance mode, you have to remove this cable management panel, which means you lose the GPU anti-sag bracket or anti-sag support. Would be better if that was integrated into the performance mode. A few other things: the GPU vertical mount is an optional extra that costs more on top of the case. I think at this price point, at around £170 for this case, I'd expect at least the metalware for the vertical mount to be included. Maybe not the PCIe cable, but at least the metalware I'd expect to be included. There's no grommets on any of the cable cutouts. Down at the bottom here, that's not such a big deal, and obviously down the side, it's not really possible with the design of that cable management panel. But up here at the top of the motherboard, there should have been some grommets in there. It looks a bit messy up there without them. The last thing is quite minor, but also worth mentioning. So when you've got the power supply installed, the top of the power supply is very close to the top of the power supply shroud, which means there's absolutely no space between the power supply and this cable management cutout at the back here, which means it's impossible to connect up or to push through any cables to connect up to the motherboard at this end, like the HD audio connection. It's just the actual connection on the cable isn't small enough to fit through the gap that's left when the power supply is in there. If you think this case internally looks familiar, then you're right, because this is the same internal design as the Sharkoon Rebel C50, which Leo reviewed just a few weeks ago. He had some issues with that. I had the same issues that Leo did it, and even more on top. So for me, the APNX Creator C1, it's not a good case. It's not one that I'd spend my own money on, and I wouldn't advise anybody else to spend the money on it. The Sharkoon Rebel C50, I think, is between £50 and £60 cheaper than this version, probably about £30–40 cheaper than the white or the black cases. So it's not good value for money either. So there's a lot of negatives to think about. If you are looking into this case, just be aware of the negatives. Make sure that it is for you, because as I say, it's not one that I'd advise buying in its current state. So that's the APNX Creator C1. Let me know what you think of the case in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to Kit Guru. If you enjoy what we do here at Kit Guru and you want to help support us, you can always head over to the store, pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.